Welcome to Unit 4, Lecture 5. So this is talking about fermentation. Learning objectives. Explain how organisms get energy in the absence of oxygen. Identify the pathways the body uses to release energy during exercise. Fermentation is similar to cellular respiration in the fact that it's a method for getting ATP. Okay? It's trying to get ATP, but what happens is there's no oxygen in the absence of oxygen. So this means that for one reason or another, the organism that's trying to do this process has no oxygen. Now, there are some organisms that rely solely on fermentation for their ATP. And then there are organisms like us who use fermentation when we run out of oxygen. Okay? So what happens is that glucose is breaking down still, but it's not going into the Krebs cycle and into electron transport chain like cellular respiration. There are two main pathways when it comes to fermentation. There's the alcoholic pathway and the lactic acid pathway. So we have alcoholic pathway over here, we have lactic acid fermentation over here. So alcoholic fermentation does not happen in our body. Lactic acid fermentation happens in our bodies. Okay. So alcoholic fermentation, lactic acid fermentation. In alcoholic fermentation, this is what's used in bread. Yeasts and other microorganisms use alcoholic fermentation, which produces ethyl alcohol, so alcohol, and carbon dioxide, okay, and NAD+. Remember we talked about NADH and NADPH and NAD+ and NADP+. Okay, so alcoholic fermentation is this side of the pathway. So the first step is the same. They both go through glycolysis, which is exactly the same as glycolysis in cellular respiration. Glucose is broken down into pyruvic acid. Then what happens to that pyruvic acid depends entirely on whether we're talking about an organism that can do alcoholic fermentation or not. So yeasts are able to go through alcoholic fermentation. They release, but they also release this carbon dioxide. That's what causes bread to rise. That's what makes it rise up and get big and fluffy and stuff like that. Okay, so that carbon dioxide, if you've ever seen a piece of bread that's got a hole in it, all right, that's because there was a carbon dioxide bubble there that didn't get broken up before the bread was actually baked. Okay, so alcoholic fermentation is really important because these organisms do that, and then they still get those 2 molecules of ATP, okay, to do something. So alcoholic fermentation is a way to get those 2 molecules of ATP. So if we're only getting 2 molecules of ATP versus organisms like us that go through cellular respiration, which are getting 30 to 40 molecules of ATP, these organisms have to be small. Okay, they have to be super small, because if they're not small, they won't function because they won't have enough ATP. Okay. The other one is the lactic acid fermentation. And in lactic acid fermentation, this is where we we take that pyruvic acid, so remember glucose, all right, that glycolysis is broken down, okay, to become pyruvic acid, which then goes and becomes lactic acid. Okay, so that lactic acid. This happens in our muscles after some vigorous exercise. So you might feel it during gym class, you might feel it during practice or a game if you're on a team. You might feel it while you're running, riding a bike, doing some sort of physical activity. This is the burn. Because what's happening is you're having acid build up in your muscles. All right, this is one of the reasons why you start to breathe heavier, your heart rate goes up. Okay, because what's happening is you're trying to repay that oxygen what's called an oxygen debt. You've basically run out of oxygen, and your muscles are like, we still got to keep going. We still got to keep going. And so as part of that keeping going, what it does is it actually creates this acid to keep making that 2-ATP. So then you start breathing heavily, and then you start trying to repay that oxygen debt. So lactic acid happens in our bodies when we're out of oxygen, but we still need to keep moving. Okay, so back in the day when we were living on the African savanna and there was a lion chasing us, it was a good idea to be able to keep going without necessarily being forced to stop right away. And so this kind of gives us that last burst of energy, but you can't sit in lactic acid fermentation for too long, or else you're actually going to do damage to your muscles. Okay, so this was a pretty short one. All right, I will see you in class. Have a great day. Bye.